Welcome to the TD K-12 podcast. I'm here to help you navigate the exciting world of living overseas, being an expat, international teaching, and more. I was an expat living and working overseas from 2002 until 2019. After relocating, I decided I wanted to share information I had for those people who might be looking to go overseas and those people who are already overseas and looking to make a move. So join me for this podcast, and if you want to watch on YouTube, the podcast is on YouTube with some visuals. There are links both in the podcast show notes and on YouTube. Please subscribe and hit the like button if you like this. Let's get started. This episode of TDK12 Practical Advice for Expats is all about job fairs. Job fairs are coming up. A few have happened, but the big ones are coming up, and everyone needs to get ready. This episode is an interview, which will start right after this introduction. I have chosen my good friend Patrick Cauley. Patrick is very experienced with job fairs. He has a wife and two children. He was overseas for a little more than a decade, and he's very honest and he doesn't exaggerate. The type of advice he has is the type of advice that's going to make the difference for you when you're going to a job fair. Job fairs are a lot of time, they're a lot of investment. You want to go and you want to be successful. You also don't want to make a decision because you feel like you have to. These are big decisions, they're life-changing, and I hope this interview helps. All right, I am joined by my good friend Patrick Cauley for this episode of TDK12.net. This episode is focused on job fairs, and I've invited Patrick on because of all the things I haven't done since I started being an expat in 2002. I have never been to a job fair. And so I obviously didn't want to write about it if I hadn't done it. And I've known Patrick for a really long time. He's an honest person. He will not romanticize any experiences. I'll let him give you a little bit of information about himself in just a minute, but I would like to stress that Patrick is a good person to listen to because Patrick has a wife and two kids. He represents a very normal different demographic that's married couple recruiting or a married couple with children recruiting. So that's one of the reasons I really wanted him to be my guest and be interviewed. So, Patrick, before we get started with the questions, would you like to give everybody just a little bit of background, like maybe when you started working overseas, when you finally moved back to the U.S., that kind of stuff?
Yeah. I started teaching in the year 1999. Oh, yeah, good year. And in 2005, my wife and I moved overseas. We were newly married, and we had no children at the time. And from 2005 to 2015, we stayed overseas. And during that time, our family grew from no children to two children. And we had worked in the Middle East primarily, but a year in the Far East in Shanghai. And then we repatriated back to the United States.
Okay, and just to be clear, you and your wife both work, so you both were recruiting.
Yeah, my wife, when we first went out, I was the only one with a teaching certification. My wife had a degree in English, but not a teaching certification. And so she was hired as a teaching assistant, and while she was working as a teaching assistant, she decided she wanted to be a librarian because she has an avid love for reading. And so she went back and took online classes and got her master's in library sciences. Library science.
Great.
Yeah.
Great. All right. So I have a few questions. I want to keep this a little structured so we don't waste all of your time. I know you're a busy guy. If anyone is wondering, Patrick, like myself, is a director of technology, and he did relocate back to the U.S. A final reason I thought about choosing Patrick was because he's already come back to the U.S. So he's had time to decompress, to think about this stuff. Sometimes when you meet people who are kind of in the moment and doing something actively, they're not really reflecting on the process, and so they may not be very objective. So I think Patrick will be quite objective. All right. So, Patrick, the first question I have is just give us an overview of how the job fair works starting the night before the job fair starts.
All right. The job fairs are insane, and they don't. It doesn't matter if you're in the job fair. The first job fair I went without my wife. It was in Boston, and I thought the night before would be I check into my hotel room and I go get some dinner and maybe a beer and then turn in early. But that's not what's happening at all. What's happening is that there are tons of impromptu interviews that are going on. There's lots of behind the scenes kind of moving and shaking. It's a very intense moment the minute you get into the hotel. So yeah, there was no rest. I was up late researching different schools and trying to figure out a strategy and all sorts of fun things. And that didn't matter. That was my first job fair to my last job fair. It's very stressful.
All right. So so the night before, and I'm just bringing this up because I've heard this numerous times. I've heard it's actually important to be there if you can a couple of days before. So the night before, you're down in the lobby, you're socializing, you're meeting people. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I would. And I think it's also important is to have contacted schools that you are interested in before the fair, and to make sure that they're at the fair or that they're going to be at the fair. And just try to get your name out there so people know who you are. They might not know who you are, but they might have an idea. They're like, oh, yeah, that person contacted me about that one position. And we haven't had a lot of strong candidates, so maybe I'll reach out to that person. But just being there ahead of time is good. And being at the hotel is super important too. Because they can just call down to the front desk and say, hey, can you connect me to Patrick's room or Tony's room or whoever's room? And then they'll just ring, and even if you're not there, they'll leave a message, and you'll know there's a message waiting for you. It just makes things a lot quicker. And they'll be like, hey, if you got a moment, I'd love to sit and talk to you. We can meet down the bar or in the lobby, and things just go from there. And that's even before the fair has officially even opened.
Right. All right. So the next day, first morning of the job fair, what happens?
Okay.
We're going to assume that you get up and eat breakfast and all that.
Yeah. So you get up, you eat breakfast, and then what happens is all the schools will be set up in a ballroom or in several different rooms, and they're usually organized by country. So Albania will be first,
Alabama. Sorry, Alabama's not a country. That was just a joke.
That's kind of funny, though. But we have a good friend from Alabama. Just saying.
That we do.
Yep. Yeah. Okay, so what happens is they're all organized by country. And you go around, and they're sitting at these tables, and behind them on giant butcher paper are the jobs that they have that they haven't filled. And you go up to them, and what you do is you say, hey, I'm interested in this job. Here's my resume. It's not an interview. It's just to get the interview. And you just go from school to school to school looking at places you want to do. And this is usually a 2-hour process, which seems like a lot of time. But you make one round, and then you go another round, and then all of a sudden you start seeing things getting crossed off. Because schools will be like, we have 5 really good candidates. We're going to hire one of those 5 candidates. Let's cross that off. And so things are changing as you're going around the ballroom multiple times.
Okay, so you're going around the ballroom. You're putting your resumes out.
Yep.
Then what's the next general phase? What's the next kind of normal thing that happens after the resume part is over?
Okay, that goes from 8 to 10, and then no interviews and nothing. Everything kind of shuts down. All the schools go back to their hotel rooms, and they meet, and they go through all the potential. They're like, okay, we have these interviews at this time and these interviews at this time, and they try to strategize and figure out who can they hire, who do they like, who don't they like, who do they go after, and what they do is they start to prioritize who they want, and then the afternoon starts and interviews start happening, and the interviews are weird because you go to the hotel room of the head of school.
So Patrick, how do you know if you're going to be interviewed?
During the round robin, that first 2 hours, when you go from school to school in that big ballroom, Your whole goal is to get interview times. Is to get a 15 to
Okay.
30-minute block with them to interview. Usually it's a
So
30-minute block.
so do they say, "Hey, Patrick," they talk to you and tell it to you, or they give you a piece of paper and write it down, or how do they? Like, I'm just saying, like, how do you
Mm.
organize all these interviews, and how does the information come to you?
In the fair, you just have a piece of paper that you write it down. They also have a piece of paper to write it down.
Okay.
Um, if there is a school that wants to talk to you, but they didn't get a chance to talk to you, usually there's some sort of common space where everybody has like a hanging file folder with their name on it, and schools can drop in little postcards or little notes for you as
Okay.
well.
Okay.
So,
Okay. All right. So you basically get this interview schedule going, and then you go to these hotel rooms, which
yeah,
is weird. I
it's
think,
very, very weird.
and I think I'm bringing this up because I've heard this a million times. I'm telling you right now, with all of my experience, I would probably fall apart the first time in that situation.
It,
Like,
yeah.
I would feel very awkward in somebody's hotel room doing an interview.
So yeah, I mean, just to give you an example, my wife and I were interviewing for a position. We were both sitting on a bed. We were both sitting on like the edge of a bed, and he was sitting in the only. There was two chairs, but it was weird for us. So we were sitting on the bed. He was sitting in a chair, and that's where the interview took place for 40 minutes. It just that's just how they all are. Some schools will have a suite where they'll have the bedroom section, and then they'll have kind of like a living room section, and that makes it a little bit more comfortable. But oftentimes it's and you're sitting on a bed or you're sitting around a small table or whatever. You're just trying to make it work. It's really weird. But that's how it
Okay.
is. That's just how it is.
Okay. So you go up, you do the interview, um, and you're going to do multiple interviews.
Yes.
During the interview, are they going to make you an offer, or is that going to come later?
That almost always comes later. That almost always comes later. Usually, if that happens right in the first interview, you have already done some sort of interview before the fair. Maybe
Okay.
maybe a Skype interview, and then an early interview right before the fair, and then I have heard of people that have gotten that, but almost always it's never the first interview.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So you do your interviews, and then how long do you wait? What happens next? When the job offers come.
So it's a weird, it's very weird because as a candidate, as a person looking for a teaching position, you feel very powerless in this situation. You feel like the schools kind of pick and choose, but actually it's kind of the reverse. So there are certain positions that the schools are very desperate to fill, that are hard to fill positions. Maybe an upper level science teacher or a librarian or these niche positions that are difficult to fill. And so they'll go after those. And depending on how those are filled, everything kind of just has a ripple effect on down. So there might not have been a school that seemed very interested in you in your first interview, but because of how things have happened, well, you might now be their number one candidate. And so you do the interviews, which is super stressful, all afternoon into the early evening. They go and reassess, and then it's very fast. It's very fast. People are putting notes. People are making phone calls and leaving messages with your room. And all of a sudden, what seemed like there were no opportunities, now all of a sudden you have 3 or 4 opportunities. Or where you thought you had 3 or 4 opportunities, now you have one or no opportunities. It's very, very fast. It's very fast.
Okay. So let me back up just a minute.
Yeah, because that was a lot.
Yeah, that was a lot, but it's okay. I knew that there would be a lot. There's a lot of information going out. In terms of when you're in the interview, how long do you think the average interview would take for you and your wife in the hotel room with each school? Like, what do you think an average amount of time is that you'd spend in there?
Yeah, the average amount of time is 30 minutes. I've in my 10 years, I've only had one interview that lasted less than 30 minutes. And it was a 15-minute interview. They were really unprepared for it. I was unprepared for it. It was just bad. It was just really bad.
Right,
So
that's interesting. So I
yeah.
think it would be a red flag if the interview was like too short.
Oh yeah,
Um,
yeah, for sure.
and this might seem, like something people take for granted, but can you explain like the professional standards required? Like, for example, is everybody dressed nicely in suits? Do you have like nice folders? Are you expected to have a pen with you? Are people carrying around their laptops?
Yeah.
Are people always on their phones, or is it mostly like a technology-free type experience?
People, it's a mix, but people are definitely dressed to impress. So men are wearing suits and ties. Women are wearing professional dresses or a suit. For sure, for sure. I think the very first fair I went into, I asked my recruiting. I asked the fair. I was like, "What is the dress code for this?" And they're like, "Oh, business casual." But then I showed up without a tie, and I was the only person there without a tie. One of the few people, and yeah, but I got a job. It was okay. Yeah, so definitely. As far as some teachers carry around a like scrapbook that shows what they've done at their school. Some people carry around. Most everybody's carrying around a notepad and pen. Because of the awkwardness, you can be sitting on a bed, so pulling out your laptop and opening that up and taking notes.
Right.
It's not the most ideal situation. So most people are using kind of it could be stationary from their room.
Right.
Yeah,
That makes sense.
And these things are always held at nice hotels too. This isn't like a Motel 8. This is usually
Yeah.
a fairly nice, a high end hotel.
And I actually have one of the last things we're going to talk about is the hotel. I actually made a bullet point because I want to stress a few things.
Okay.
So yeah, so it's a nice affair. I would also like to say that it's probably not a good idea to even rely on technology because you're in a hotel and you're moving around. You're not going to be able to go into their room and be like, "Hey man, what's your connection code?"
Every time, every fair I've gone to. So the first fair I went to was back in 2005, and Wi-Fi, if you wanted it, you had to pay for it. Actually, there was no Wi-Fi. What they had was an Ethernet port in the room. So you needed to have, and they provided a cable. That was nice of them, but I didn't have a computer I didn't bring my computer. But the other fairs I've been to have been international. They've been in Bangkok. These have been really nice hotels, but the Wi-Fi every time has been just overloaded and sketchy and just
Right.
not very good.
The reason I'm bringing this up is as people are preparing, you need to be able to represent yourself without carrying devices around. So scrapbooks, probably a good idea. Notebooks, definitely a good idea. I would even say, like, when I go in interviews, I have a very sentimental leather folder my grandfather gave me when I was in middle school. And I use that. I still use it when I go in interviews. And it kind of calms me because I've used it for so many years. But at the same time, it looks really nice. When I open it up to work inside of it, it's not a barrier between me and the person I'm speaking with. And that, I'm just like trying to imagine, like almost every interview I've had, there's been a table or something. I can't imagine sitting on the edge of a bed and talking to somebody about a very important job, a good salary, and good benefits. It's weird.
And being in very close proximity with them too. I mean, you're sitting at a table. You have the table that divides you. Here, there might be nothing dividing you, and you might be as close as 2 to 3 feet, or a meter away from somebody, which is pretty close. Another thing I would recommend is having some sort of bag, because a lot of times schools will give you information. They'll have a pre-prepared like a folder with information about the school, population,
but not a backpack.
Not a back. No, well, it'd have to be kind of a professional looking.
It would have to be swanky.
Yeah, you have to be kind of a professional looking backpack. But the reason why I would say that is because you want to be able to. You don't want to be walking into other interviews and you've got 3 or 4 other information from other schools in your hand. Because they're just going to be like, wow, geez.
That's a good idea.
They're already talking with so many schools.
I would like to point out that although I do not have experience at job fairs, I have a lot of experience working with the head of school or the person doing recruitment in looking for candidates because I'm pretty good at research. And I've always found it fascinating that when the head of schools come back and tell stories, they are talking to other schools all the time.
All the time.
Like, they know each other. Like, they're like, hey, did Patrick apply for a job at your school too? Like, what'd you think about him? Like, they share information. So I think that's good. Like, you don't actually want them to know who you've been speaking with.
Yeah, and I in my first job fair, I interviewed at a school in Japan, and the guy told me out. He goes, "You just don't." I was fairly new to teaching. He goes, "You don't have enough international experience. Well, I'm not going to hire you." Like this was 5 minutes into the interview, and I freaked out. I didn't know what to do. And he goes, "But he goes, I think you're going to be a great teacher. I think you're going to be really good. So what other schools are you interviewing with?" And and this was a person I talked to him for another 30 minutes just about what I'm going to do and where I want to be. So because he knew other schools is exactly what you're talking about, Tony. He knew other schools, and maybe even behind the scenes, he put in a good word for me. But when I had a decision between two schools, I actually called him and left a message, and he called me back while I was in my hotel room, and he says, "Here's what I would do, and here's why." And that was an experienced head of school talking to me, and I was like, that's what I'm going to do. This guy knows he's not going to steer me wrong, and he sure didn't. It was really good. They all talk to each other. They all know of each other through reputation, even if they don't know them personally. So
Right, and it's usually like kind of a win-win scenario in most cases. So if this guy's in Japan, his only competition would be other schools in Japan.
mhm.
So everybody else, he's going to help them out so that they help him out in the future. Just today, a person I know who's a principal at a school posted online because they have two teachers, a married couple, in an emergency situation. They have to leave the country. And she says, I need cover for a year for these two jobs. So I took that and I circulated it in as many places as I could. And she definitely appreciates that. And if she gets people from that in the future, if something comes up that I don't know about, she's definitely going to send it to me and say, "Hey, Tony, I was thinking about you. This might be something you're interested in." And I would say that's really how the environment works. It's a lot more collegial than people think.
Oh yeah,
And it's not as crazy competitive. I mean, it seems, like you said, it seems like, super competitive and really, really stressful. But at the same time, some of these people are like you said, at our school, you're not going to be a good fit, but I know a school that you will be a good fit for.
yeah. Anytime we interviewed, my wife and I interviewed with a bunch of schools, and whenever we decided, or the school decided, that this wasn't going to work out, my wife and I were always, thank you very much for your time. Here's where we've worked. If you have people that you think we might know, and you want an opinion about them, we'd be happy to weigh in. Just offering our honest assistance.
Great.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's get back to it. So Patrick, now, okay, the interviews are all over.
They're over.
Now you get let's say that you wake up the next day, you have 3 job offers, okay? And
yeah,
they come in. Let's say 2 of them are like notes. Somebody sent you, put a note in your folder, and maybe one is a phone call.
Well, no,
how much
the job offers almost always come in person.
Oh, they come in person. Okay.
Almost always. They might put a note or a phone call and be like, "Hey, we need to meet." And this would be the second,
Okay.
or this would be like a third or a second interview. We really want to talk to you as soon as you can. It'll be a very urgent kind of a message, and call us back, and we'll make a time for you, and that kind of thing. It's usually that's how that works.
Okay, so you go. Let's say you've got 3. So you've got 3 lined up.
Mm-hmm.
You go to the first one. They give you the pitch. They make the offer. Do you have time to say, I need some time, or do you have to say yes or no right then?
It depends. Most schools will give you a little bit of time. And when I say a little bit of time, like they'll say, we need to know tonight, or we need to know early tomorrow morning.
Okay.
Less than 24 hours. There are some schools that think highly of themselves, and they may say, we need a decision right now. We need to know immediately. I don't know. I don't know if that that's kind of an unprofessional thing. You don't see it very often, but usually some schools will give you a little bit of time. But because there's other fairs, there's other positions they have to consider. And these fairs are super intense and super fast. Because if you say no, they want to work. They want to go to their next option right away.
Right, because they don't have a lot of time either. They
That's right.
Close it.
That's
they gotta
right.
Close it out.
So they're up against the clock as much as you are, and And so they usually give you a little bit of time to think about it, maybe that evening or the next day. It just kind of depends on how far along if it's the very last day of the fair, they may want to know before that afternoon, before they go to the airport and fly back.
Right. And I think it's good to have a little bit of empathy there. Like if you're the candidate, you need to put yourself in the school's position and say, if I were them, I don't want to leave the fair empty handed. I want to close out my jobs. And also I would like a few minutes to talk to people, and it's the last day. I need to get this wrapped up.
Yeah.
I know plenty of people who've gone to job fairs to recruit and come back basically like they went with like 9 positions and only filled 1.
Or 0.
Zero. And it's
Yep.
expensive. It's expensive for schools to do this. And, it's not like they're just like rolling in cash and like throwing money around like a casino or something like that. I mean, these people, a lot of times the people that go to the job fairs, the head of school may or may not be there. Principals are going to be there. I've seen deans of residential life go. These people are actually working and doing the job fair. They have a job.
Yeah.
And they're getting emails all the time from work as well.
And another thing to consider is that international schools move very fast, very, very fast. So, for example, a school in the States, you might have a teacher come in there and they might stay there for 15, 20, 30 years. In international school, the average stay, I've talked to a couple people who've done studies on this, and it's around 3 years. Now, that does vary from certain schools to certain countries, but 3 years. So it's not uncommon for a school to have 30% of its staff or 20% of its staff leave in a given year, and they have to fill 12, 15 positions.
Yeah, I think the stats say, at least when I did my principal's training center in 2015, maybe, was this course I took that reviewed all of the stuff like with HR, and I think they said that the healthiest or most stable schools, meaning the ones that have the lowest turnover and have been running the longest, generally are around 12% turnover annually. That means that's
high.
a lot of people. I mean, if you think about like a school in America, I mean, you might lose like one person every like 3 or 4 years.
Yeah.
Okay, so you get your interview, you get to offer, you take an offer. When you take an offer, is there something you sign at the job fair, or are you waiting for that to come after you leave?
You sign a promissory note, and it's kind of like it's just a handshake is what it is, pretty much. It's not a contract. It's a promissory note, and it pretty much says that I promise that I will show up for work on the first day that you say I have to work. That's pretty much what it is, and that I'm not going to take any other jobs, and that this school isn't going to hire anybody else for this position. It's kind of like a leap of faith from both ends in a way.
Right. And it's not legally binding, right? But here's the thing.
Yeah.
And I'm going to keep stressing this. Schools talk to each other. If you burn a school from a job fair, you are probably never going to be invited to another job fair.
Yeah, the school can if you break the promise, the school can report you to that job agency, which is usually Search Associates or ISS, and they can thus ban you from any other job fairs if necessary. Or even if they don't ban you, like you said, Tony, these people talking are like, oh yeah, we offered this guy, he said yes, and then a week later he turned us down and took a what he thought was a better job.
Right. So once you do that, once you commit, then job search is over. You're kind of preparing to move.
Yeah. And that's a huge ordeal anyway. Even if you're already international, that's a tremendous amount of work. Getting ready to move, doing the actual move, moving, getting settled. That is like 6 months worth of work, as you know, Tony, because you've done it as well.
And this is why I've been putting together these like various podcast episodes, and I'm trying to keep them as brief as possible. But there's a lot that goes into each piece. Okay, so I have some other questions for you. So
Yep,
the job fair process is obviously very stressful,
it is.
and it's not enjoyable.
No.
And teachers and schools might have to go to more than one job fair.
Yeah.
Um, so do you have any techniques or strategies that you use when you approach schools at the job fair? Like you said, you go into this big room and everyone's organized. Like, have you gleaned anything from that process to help people like make decisions about who they're going to approach and how they're going to do it?
I have. So the very first job fair, I didn't really know what I was getting into. I had no idea what this was. I walked in and there were 900. This is a big one in Boston. There was 900 people there to get a job, and they're like, "Hey,
Wow.
we got good news. We have like 1,200 jobs that are going to be at this fair." And everybody cheered. And he goes, "The bad news is about a third of you are not going to get a job at all." And it just got really quiet. And he goes, "That's just how it is. It doesn't mean you're a bad teacher or a bad educator, or just doesn't mean it's a good fit." So that was a big eye-opening experience. Because I didn't have any preparation. I had no idea. I had been emailing a school back and forth, and they said, "We're going to be at this fair. We want to talk to you." And then I showed up at the fair, and they weren't there.
All right. So is that common?
Um, it can be, yeah, yeah, it can be. And then when eventually I heard back from them, and they said, "Oh, we're sorry. We had filled the position a week before the fair, and so we didn't go to the fair because it would save them quite a bit of
A lot of
money."
money.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
So
All
yeah.
right. So
Anyway,
so back to your techniques.
yeah.
So
Techniques is one is research, research, research. Start sending out your resume to schools you might be interested in right away. I mean, don't even if they haven't even posted any job openings, just go ahead, send it. It can't hurt. You can always send it again.
right,
But be very proactive. Nobody is going to come looking for you. Nobody's like,
right,
"Man, I heard there's this great teacher out of Minnesota. I hope, you know, I hope they're at the fair." There's nobody doing that. There's nobody doing that. You got to go to them and show them what you can do. So start reaching out, and then when the fair is announced and the list of schools that are going there, start looking at the places you think you want to work. And if you don't know any of the schools, if it's your first time, then start with a country. What country would I like to live in? What
right.
looks like a good country to live in, and
So have an idea. Don't just show up and be like,
no.
Angola. I don't know. Like, do some research. Like, if you don't think you can live in Africa, don't
Don't do
go.
it.
Don't
Yeah.
waste your time at the tables because it's wasting your time and their time.
Every year overseas I've worked, there's been a person or a couple or a family who are just not suited for that school or that country. And it always ends badly. It doesn't end well.
Right,
And the best case scenario is they work out their contract and then go back home or go someplace else. Worst case is they just don't show up for work one day and they've got a flight someplace. They've got a flight home.
right. They just leave.
They just leave, yeah. So yeah, be honest with yourself of how adventurous you want to be, where you think you could go. To start doing some research on that. Another thing is when you get to the fair, be very open minded. When first fair I went to, I wanted to go to the Far East. I wanted to go to China. I wanted to go to South Korea. I wanted to go to Japan. That didn't happen at all. In fact, the first time around the ballroom, every one of those schools either didn't have a job or told me that they have too many applicants for the job and that they're going to hire one of those. And so within like 15 minutes, all my great plan of going to the Far East was gone. And I had to improvise. And I'd put a tremendous amount of money and time into the fair already. Because it's not cheap to go to the fair. Even if you're flying locally, it's not cheap. So I opened my mind and I said, where am I going to end up? And I ended up in Kuwait. And that turned out to be a great school for me and my wife. It was fantastic, actually. We met some of our best friends ever there. We had a great time for the 4 years that we were there. And we learned a lot. We learned a whole lot. So keep an open mind. If there's a school you're like, "Man, I don't think I could ever live there," just keep an open mind. Do some research, and you might surprise yourself.
What about when you're at the job fair? How much mingling do you do with other candidates?
Um, I do some, not a lot. Everybody's so focused. Everybody's so hyper focused. So if you don't know anybody there, it's hard to mingle with them because
Right.
they're really
And it's
working the whole time.
it's let's just be clear, it's not a networking event.
Yeah, it's not. It's really not. The only time it's a networking event is if you're going in there with like I'm going to go in there and I know there's these 5 schools that'll at least one of them is going to offer me. Maybe then it's a networking event for you, but it's really for the most part it's not. For them, everybody's super focused. Everybody's uh, you know, because it's such a pressure cooker. Everybody's just doing what they can do to find that next step in their life. It's
Right.
yeah.
No, that's a good way to put it. Um, can you think of some common threads of questions that schools ask that people coming from North America who would just interview for a normal job in a school in America would just not be prepared for? Be like, what is this person asking me?
Yeah, these schools are not based in most of the schools. There are some that are, but most of the schools are not based in North America or the United States. And so certain labor laws don't apply. So they might ask you your age, which
Right.
is you can't do that. But
Right.
in Dubai, Tony, you and I were there where they had hired a teacher, and he turned 64, I think it was, and the school was informed that he could no longer teach because he was too old to have a work visa.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah. So I think that's important. Like, you can't, when you go into something like this, the normal rules for human resources simply don't apply.
They do not.
They can ask you all kinds of questions. If you're going to go to the Middle East, they're going to ask you about your relationships.
Yep.
It's possible, at least they could. They're going to want to know about your age. There's a lot of countries where there are either age restrictions or they're worried about your health because they know medical care isn't going to be great.
Yep. Yep.
Um,
And they might ask if you have a criminal background because a lot of countries will require a background check. And if
I think every country now, so let's not say every country, every major recruitment agency now, as far as I know, they require the background check just to let you complete your profile.
Yep.
So people are going to have to do that. But Patrick's right. They can ask you these questions, and
Yep.
you would never be asked these questions in the United States in an interview.
I knew a person who got asked about his weight because he was a bit obese, and they said, "Hey, this is a very warm country. There's not a lot of air conditioning, and our school goes up and not out, and so you're going to be climbing a lot of stairs. Do you think you're healthy enough? And is this going to be an issue with you?" And I mean, that's something that's a lawsuit in America.
It is, and and a lot of the job fairs aren't even in America. So the ones that are in America might be a little bit more tame.
Yeah.
But if you go to the Bangkok job fair,
Oh,
they can ask you anything.
everything and anything. Yeah.
Right.
If you're
So
homosexual,
you need,
well, our it's technically illegal here. Do you have a partner? Is that partner coming with you? Well, yeah.
and it's true, and it's not that they're trying to discriminate. In fact, I would say most international schools are very open-minded and very diverse.
Yep.
They're making sure that nothing bad is going to happen to you once you get into the country because of the rules and laws within the country.
Yeah, yeah. And some schools, they might be doing you a favor. I knew a head of school. So I have a child with special needs, and when we were hired at a particular school, he was a month old or something like that. He was very young. So we didn't know. And then later on, we tried to get him into that school, and the head of school said, "No, She goes, "Patrick, we can't accept him. We don't have the resources here." And technically, if not technically, she goes, "But if you were at a job fair and I was going to hire you, I would not hire you based on your child's special needs because I know how difficult it is to get resources for your child here. And that's putting you in a terrible position of stress and possibly failure. And that's thus means you can't do your job to your full extent. And it's a bad situation." And it was a hard thing to hear, but I was like, wow, that's absolutely right. Yeah, she's right on the money with that. Um,
And yeah, and I think these things are just really important for people to like be mentally prepared for. You've got to be able to answer tough questions, personal questions, and things that you're just not normally comfortable doing.
yeah.
Okay, I want to loop back around to one more point, and I just want to see if you agree with me. Because I have seen people make, I feel like this is a mistake, and you can tell me if it's a mistake or not. I
Okay.
think it's a mistake.
Yeah.
Let's say you're going to go to a job fair. Let's use two examples just quickly. If you were in the United States, let's say you're in Ohio, and you're going to go to the Boston Job Fair.
Yeah.
How much is it going to cost you to fly to the job fair and attend it? Don't count the hotel, just the travel.
Okay. Just the travel is tough too. Gosh, the Boston Fair that I went to, I don't know if this is the case anymore, but I believe it was in February. I believe it was in February.
Right, it's cold.
It was cold, and it was huge. And there was a job fair the week before. Anyhow, so the hotel, because it's a convention and it's a big convention, you're going to look at $200 to $300 a night for the hotel, and you want to be at the hotel. You definitely want to be at the hotel.
Right. So like if you fly, you're probably going to spend $500-$600 to fly.
For sure.
Taxis, Uber, whatever.
Yeah.
So, and then if you were to do an international fair, I think the price could be like the travel alone could be like, let's say you're in the United States and you want to do the Bangkok fair.
Yeah.
I mean, you need to budget about $1,200 to $1,500 for that trip.
Oh yeah, for sure. The hotel and the airfare alone. I mean, once you're in Bangkok, Bangkok is fairly inexpensive.
Right.
But yeah.
So
getting there is a lot.
What I've noticed people doing is whether they're going to a domestic fair, international fair, like in Bangkok, there are some people who try to save money by not staying in the hotel.
Ooh.
So they take off work. They spend hours and hours researching. They're really well prepared. They buy new clothes. They buy the plane ticket. So let's say in the US, with all of the stuff they're doing, they've invested $600 to $800 in the process. They're asking off, like, whatever that means, 2 or 3 days, maybe more. They're planning on leaving their job, so maybe they've already resigned for the next year.
Yeah.
They're basically all in, and when they get there, they want to save $50 or $60 a night. So let's say they're there for 4 nights. They want to save $200 so they don't stay at the hotel. It's the same in Bangkok, because Bangkok's crazy. Like,
yeah,
the hotel's going to be like $200 a night, but there's a million nice places to stay in Bangkok for like $40 a night.
Oh yeah, yeah.
So people are like, oh, I'll just stay next door to the, like, I heard this 2 years ago. I will just stay next door to the hotel.
No.
So just reiterate if you think that is a good idea or a bad idea.
It's a terrible idea. It's a terrible idea for this. It's because what are you going to do in between your job interview? So let's say you have an interview at 1 p.m. and then you don't have an interview for 3 p.m. Well, are you going to walk 30 minutes to next door and then try to walk back? And remember, Bangkok is hot, or Boston in February is really cold, and who knows what the conditions are. Are you just going to hang out in the lounge? What are you going to do?
Well, you would have to, because how are they going to contact you?
That's right. How are they going to contact you? Maybe they have your cell phone. But remember, if you're at an international fair, do you have a Bangkok cell phone number, or do you have your American cell phone number?
Right. And let's say you pick up a cell phone at the airport, which is cheap. Are they going to have one? Because theirs might just call, like, they're not going to spend an international rate calling you. They're expecting you to stay in the hotel.
Yeah, yeah. So if you're in the hotel, you can get messages from the phone. You can go back and check your box, your hanging file folder all the time. You have a place to kind of relax and decompress and to research. And this is the biggest thing, because things change so fast. You could be like me, and I'm like, man, I want to go to Far East, and all of a sudden, Far East is shut down. So I've got to, what else do I have? Oh, here's Costa Rica, here's the Middle East, here's Venezuela, here's all these other countries that might work out for me. Here's Turkey. Let me go around and just try to learn what I can about that country and about that school as much as I can before I get into an interview. So you need that flexibility. I don't know how many times in Bangkok we'd be coming back from breakfast and we'd see taxi after taxi pull up and people in suits just getting out and like rushing in. And so they're just rushing in. It's just added extra stress to an already extremely stressful situation. Don't do it to yourself. Spend the extra money, stay in a hotel. Sorry, that was long about that.
No, that's exactly what I wanted to get to. And I know we've mentioned it a couple times, but I think it is really important. And also, like, if you can do it, don't just get to the hotel the day before the job fair. Get there 2 days before. Use that first day to relax, to settle in. You're not going to get over your jet lag if you're coming from really far away in 3 or 4 days.
Yeah.
So you're going to be kind of like in and out. You're going to need to eat and sleep on a weird schedule. If you're not going to have jet lag, that doesn't really matter. But still having that 1 day to just decompress, get organized, review all of your notes, and just get focused, and just know that day before the job fair, that kind of afternoon and evening, that's a good time for you to make some initial contacts. Let any schools that you're interested in know the day you're going to be arriving at the hotel so that they can say, hey, I know it's like a day early, but would you like to have a chat? Like, give yourself as many options as possible because time is not on your side.
It's not on the school side either. It's a double-edged sword here. It's not just
right. And time is the enemy in this situation, and it's moving very quickly.
The last job fair my wife and I went to, we got there, and she's a librarian, so librarian's very niche. So there were a fair amount of positions, but there weren't a ton. And so we went to a couple schools and we talked to. But what we found out very quickly, like after the first round of interviews, that a lot of schools all of a sudden became very interested in my wife. They're like, wow, we need a librarian, and she looks great. And all of a sudden, after the first round of interviews, we had a fair amount of interviews, then everything kind of exploded. All of a sudden, a school in Saudi Arabia looks like our best bet. Looks like a good school to go to. And now all of a sudden, we have schools in Korea. We have a school in China. We have a school in Saudi Arabia. We have there are 2 schools in Korea. It just kind of opened up for us. And then it helped us focus. And so if we weren't at the hotel, that wouldn't have helped. That wouldn't have happened. So that kind of a thing. We would have missed all that stuff as it unfolded in real time for us. Sorry, I got off the topic there a little bit. Sorry.
No, it's fine. I think this information is really important, and people really need to understand the process. They need to kind of empathize with the situation, and they need to have a strategy. I think it is a huge mistake to try to save a little money when you've invested so much time. I also think it is a huge mistake to not invest enough time.
Yeah.
Because there are some people who are going to get lucky. It is interesting. There's one thing I was thinking about. There are certain jobs that, and it doesn't mean you're going to make a tremendous amount of money, but it does mean that there are certain jobs that are harder for schools to fill. And if you're a person that fills one of those criteria, you have a little bit more selection. So I was thinking about, and I'm not going to mention anybody's name specifically, but Patrick and I used to work with this guy, and his nickname was Teddy Ballgame. And he was and is a specialized mathematics teacher, higher level mathematics.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say he could go to a job fair and not wear a tie and get a job.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Because now there's not that many schools that are offering what he teaches. But if there is a school offering what he teaches, there are very few people that teach it. And I know a girl that has traveled all over the world teaching higher level chemistry. And she can teach in the IB and the British curriculum. And she has collected all of her test scores from her students for the last 10 years. And she has a higher percentage of, at least in the IB, of what they would consider a perfect or top level score than anybody I've ever met. She just shows up and says, here's the number of 7s I've received in the last 5 years.
Yeah.
she's always going to be able to get a job if there's a higher level chemistry job available. It doesn't mean they're going to be, it's not like Jerry Maguire where they're going to be like, oh, I'm going to give you $10 million to teach chemistry.
No.
But she's not ever really going to have to worry. When she's ready to recruit, she's going to find a job.
Yep.
But, if you're married and both you and your spouse need a position, or if you're partnered, and it's the same thing. These combinations have to be planned, and you need to do your research, because you might show up at the job fair and find a great job for you, but your spouse has nothing.
Yeah, there was one year that my wife and I were soft recruiting. So that means we weren't going to go to a fair. We were just going to do everything over email and Skype. And if we didn't have a job by a certain date, which was a date the school said that we had to let them know if we were returning or not, then we would return to the school. And there was a school, and we interviewed with them. We both interviewed with them twice over Skype. And it looked really good. And then we didn't get the job, and they said, we hired a principal, and the principal, his wife is a librarian, and we really needed a principal, so we gave her the librarian position. So there's no position for your wife. And so we missed out on that opportunity. But it's like you said, the schools, if they can, 2 for 1, well, this is a couple, and this is what we're needing. It's very often that they will go for a couple over 2 individuals, because it's easier for them to fill it. And there's some supposed stability there too, that these are a couple, they're not going to flake out on us, they're not just going to leave in the middle of the night. So
yeah, there's that. And if you have children and your children are going to need an education, if you haven't done your research, you might find out that you've been offered a great job, but the curriculum available at the school is going to be really difficult for your children. Or, there's some campuses, like, for example, a lot of the UWC, United World College campuses, a lot of them are only high school. So if you have middle school age children or elementary school age children, and you take a job there, and both you and your spouse or partner get a job, your children can't go to school. So you're going to be in a situation where you might have to pay partial or full private school tuition at another school,
and
which is going to be really expensive.
Yeah, it just depends on the country. But you're right, Tony. We both worked in Shanghai, where it's not uncommon to see high school curriculum in the $35,000 to $50,000 U.S. dollars,
right,
a year.
A year, and if you had to pay even half of that, that's a huge loss. And I've seen people in that situation where they take jobs and they haven't looked into the curriculum the school's offering for their own children.
Yeah.
And I do want to say that, like, when you want to go to a job fair, you've signed up with one of these agencies, and there's a lot of new agencies now. But either way, no matter how you sign up or who you work with, they're going to give you a list well in advance of the schools that are going to be there.
Yes.
So, like Patrick said, you're not going to be 100% sure what jobs are available. There might be some posted, but the schools are going to show up with jobs that they haven't posted online yet. You need to, however, in advance, just like Patrick said, look at that list of schools. And if there's not a single school on that list that you don't want at all, like you have no interest, even if you've looked at it with like an open mind, you shouldn't go. But there's probably going to be a few, and you need to research them. Everything you can find out about them. Figure out what kind of curriculum that they have, where they're located, what's it like to work there. Like, do as much research as you can.
Yeah.
So that you know. And if you find a school on that list that seems to meet all of your criteria, I would say, and you walk in and they have a job for you and a job for your spouse, and you've got 50 choices to make, that would be my first stop. For like putting in a CV and starting the process.
Yeah,
because,
trying to get that interview.
Yeah, trying to get that interview, because you already know that they're like a good match for you. So it's not like you're going in blind. You get that information before, and it takes hours. Like, I'm always amazed at how much time it takes me to like do a single application, and it takes hours and hours of research. So make certain that you set that. I would say, like, have a disciplined approach if you can. if you're going to do this, once you're signed up and committed, make sure like 3 or 4 nights a week for at least an hour and a half, you've set aside time just to work on your recruitment.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Absolutely. The more research you put into it, the better off you're prepared. Even if you're like, wow, these are the 7 schools I want, and then none of them happen, at least you'll be like, okay, here's why I like those 7 schools.
Right.
Here are the characteristics I liked it. So there's these other 4 schools that are interested. Which one of those are closely resemble those 7 schools that I were initially interested in, and why? It helps you go through that thought process of what you want, what you actually want. So
great. Well, Patrick, I don't have anything else. That was amazing. I think anybody who listens to this is going to have a better idea of like how job fairs work, and they're going to get some ideas from this and be a bit more prepared. Is there anything else you would like to say about job fairs and or the job fair process?
No, just good luck. A lot of schools like the job fairs over a Skype interview because they like the idea of seeing you in person, looking you in the eye, just having access to you, for a prolonged period of time. And you also, it works both ways. You have access to them as well. So don't just think it's a one-way road, but the job fairs are a good way to get a good sense of what you're walking into.
Great. Great advice. Well, that's all I have. And Patrick, thank you again.
Oh, thank you.
And until the next episode.